Hey, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everybody. Welcome to Game Day Essentials on Twitch. I am Scott Ward, Solution Architect here at AWS, and I am joined once again today by...
I'm Joe Fontes, a Solutions Architect here at Amazon Web Services. Well, thank you, Scott, for having me on again.
Yeah, well, thanks for being here, Joe. We're really glad you could be here again. And we are coming to you once again from our home base of Seattle, Washington, done with a little bit of travel. So we're all comfy and back at home in Seattle and enjoying the weather here. So it's good to have everybody here today. Thanks for joining us. Always excited to come and talk to you about Game Day, what Game Day is, and key things you need to be thinking about for Game Day. Are you good to be home? Happy to be home, Joe?
It's interesting. We just got in from New York City, and it's I got off the plane, and I'm sitting in traffic, and I'm thinking, it's the same amount of traffic as being in New York. The difference is that everybody's quiet, kind of like suffering in silence. I can't say that I missed the beeping, but I do love the city, and I think we had a great time out there.
Yeah, no, it was a great time, but it's always good to be home. But New York was fun in its own way. So let's set the stage here for what Game Day is, especially for our new viewers. If you've heard this before, please hang tight. Maybe you guys can give this overview next time. So Game Day is an event that we put on at AWS. We run it at a lot of our public events, summits throughout the year. reInvent, that's our big spot where we run Game Day. And the theme of Game Day is that it's a hands-on live competition with real AWS resources where you're working as a team to solve problems. So we focus it on, it's your first day on the job at Unicorn Rentals, which is a hot new startup delivering animal rentals to the masses. The past team that built an application that you're responsible for supporting has unfortunately left the company prior to that, and they've left you an architecture that may be questionably built and some documentation that may be right or wrong. Once again, you don't know for sure. And so it's really your job to work as a team, often with people that you don't know as well, to figure out what the heck do you have in front of you? What's the architecture like? What's this runbook mean? How does what's happening to us? You're often receiving traffic. How does that apply to what we're running in the account? How is it architected well? How is it not well architected? What do I need to do to be successful? To top it all off, there is a scoreboard that is on a screen throughout the day where we're tracking all the team's progress to really find out who are the top teams, who can really progress and survive and evolve their architecture. So there's a lot of bragging rights on the line as well. So that's a quick kind of summary of Game Day in general, regardless of the type of Game Day we run. That's generally the theme that we like to operate with. We actually ran a Game Day last week as an extension of the New York Summit, not part of the New York Summit, and at the New York Loft, which is absolutely amazing, by the way, if you get to go to New York and go to the Loft down in the Soho area. Super cool. One of the best lofts I've been to of all the AWS lofts. So highly recommend checking it out if you're visiting New York or if you work in the New York area. But Joe, you want to give us a quick kind of rundown of how things went with that Game Day?
Yeah, sure. The loft is really nice down there. And I'm not just saying that because I happen to be 2 blocks from my hotel, which is always beneficial. But no, every time we run a Game Day, there's always something, some new story that we come across, something really interesting. I think the highlight here was, here we have a picture of the winning team from the New York City Loft. And one of these individuals is actually a high school student. I was surprised to learn that.
And she was actually the one doing all the coding throughout the event, too. So everybody was huddled around her. She was modifying the code drops that we did and stuff. It was super impressive. We did not know she was a high schooler.
Yeah, till the very end.
Yeah, it was very cool.
Yeah, what we don't have here are the awesome prizes that I bought. I completely forgot to take a picture of the winners with the prizes. We had these cool stuffed animal unicorns that I'm not saying I waited till the last minute to buy them, but they just also have to be sold in New York out by the street vendors. But no, I mean it turned out really cool. We had some really fun prizes, and wow, that was just an interesting story, and what a shock to me.
No, very, very cool. I think you watching can also see that the traveling trophy,
yes.
The number of names on that trophy is slowly filling up. We'll probably have to move to the bottom, and then we're going to have to probably start covering names again. So look for a Game Day event near you soon to get your name on that trophy before it gets covered up.
And I wonder how historically significant any item has to be to make the Library of Congress, because I'm feeling good about the Game Day trophy. Like at some point, it's going to be a request. Like we need to bring this in. Also at the Loft, this is the team from Red Hat and Ansible that were there. They actually sponsored the event, so that was really cool too. This was a little bit of a different take on Game Day, where we had all these little checkpoints throughout the day, where if any of the contestants or participants kind of fell behind, they would be given Ansible assets, which is an automation technology built by Red Hat, to be able to catch up. So it would be templates, it would be scripts, and it would get them up to speed with the rest of the staff and with the rest of the players. And we got some really positive responses. So here's the team from Red Hat. They were supposed to bring Red Hat T-shirts for us. And I didn't get a Red Hat T-shirt, so if anybody from Red Hat is watching, I'd like a size large. So I think they've heard enough of that from me, though. At the entire day, I was just like, hey, can I get another T-shirt? Can I get a T-shirt? We got stickers, though, so if anybody wants stickers, we could somehow make that happen if you're in Seattle. Here are a few of the players. Throughout the day, we had a few people come and go. Oh, here we go, the prizes. They're right there.
That barely fits on the podium.
It does. And today I'm not wearing my unicorn bracelet, but I'll make sure to rock it tomorrow. Here we have some of the AWS staff. That's Carmen there on the left. Here, if you're interested in sponsoring a game day, you'll notice that at the top right, there is the Red Hat logo. That is some prime marketing real estate right there. Once again, Red Hat doing the presentation. Some of the game day contestants. Everybody had a really good time. Here are a couple of essays in the picture there. And so this is it turned out to be a really fun event.
Yeah, no, it was great event. Really, if anybody's on the stream watching and you guys were there, thanks for attending. We'd love to see you at future events. So quick shout out to everybody on the stream real quick. Thanks for chiming in on the chat if you guys are. Due to some last-minute technical issues, I've got a mic in my hand. I'm not going to be able to spend a lot of time typing back to you guys, but we'll communicate verbally. So thanks for joining the live stream. If you're just joining, once again, this is Game Day Essentials, where we come and talk to you about what Game Day is at AWS and help you understand some basic concepts that you might want to know about to be successful in Game Day, but also things that you'll be able to take away and apply to your real-world experience on AWS. So last week, our episode was focused on decoupling, right, Joe?
Yes.
And we talked about a lot of different ways about what decoupling was and strategies you could take. We took an existing architecture we had and kind of ripped it apart and talked about different ways to handle decoupling. What are some, in just a couple minutes, Joe, what are some things that you took away from the decoupling discussion last week?
I think it was just kind of going through a lot of the things that we've seen historically and some of the benefits of decoupling. The number one example that I always hear whenever you talk to startups, small, medium businesses is, we have this LAMP stack. We need to be able to scale it. What does that look like? Are we just adding more machines that have, MySQL, Linux, Apache, PHP on it? Or are we breaking those segments out? And we saw really the benefit of breaking out those segments, how that applies to other technologies, in different ways that we could scale with that type of solution. Gave some examples. You gave a few examples. We're probably going to look through a few of our historical examples today. Actually, nothing but the best practice implementations.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I called this out last week too, but when I finally learned what decoupling meant and the benefits of that, it really kind of opened my eyes and changed the way that I think about things. And that was actually even trying to implement it in a third-party product that wasn't really as flexible. So anytime that you can decouple things and boil them down to the smallest element is really beneficial, because you can give yourself the ability to scale at different levels and implement the types of solutions you want, whether it be for the compute or the storage or any of the different tiers. So, and there's lots of different ways to decouple when you look at the AWS services that we talked about, whether it be Elasticache, Redshift, S3, Dynamo. There's lots of different things.
And even the difference between like NoSQL and relational. I mean, there's so many ways just to set up MySQL replication. Yep. Are you going multi-master? There's new releases for multi-master as well for things like, the global ID set, which kind of gives you better capabilities in scaling horizontally. And then, what does that look like for NoSQL? This idea of, NoSQL sharding with something like MongoDB, the automated scaling of DynamoDB. So, what used to be a little bit of black magic on the back end has really been made a lot more practical.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great closeout there. So we're moving on from decoupling, which we talked about last week, and then this week's theme is really security. And security is one of my favorite areas. It's what I deal with almost all the time as far as all the partners I work with and the space I'm working with at AWS. There's a lot we could talk about when it comes to security. We're going to focus on some key concepts that we think are relevant to what you would do in GameDay and being able to triage accounts. So we certainly won't cover everything, but we've got some key things here. And we're going to start out with identity, because I think that's really a core concept, and it's one of the first things you're going to actually move into when you work on an AWS account. And so identity and authorization has always been something that we've dealt with, but prior to the cloud, we did things a different way, or we had a lot of different approaches. And Joe, you were telling me earlier on that you had a couple of thoughts on things that you did pre-cloud, around identity. Maybe you could share one of those examples or a quick idea that you had of how something was done before then.
Got to tell you, I remember reinventing the wheel multiple times a year.
Mm-hmm.
So the goal of any organization, going back far, was centralized authentication, centralized access in accounting. So the big term is AAA. It's authentication, authorization, and access in accounting. And so kind of the first step is we need a centralized way to authenticate everyone. Mm-hmm. So whether you're logging into your computer or you're an admin logging into a switch or a router or whatever device is out there, we don't want to manage logins across all these devices. How would you even manage updating a password for something like that? Or Bob moves on to a new company. You've got to scrub Bob's access across all these devices. And kind of going through historically, it really got me to think. How many different technologies have I used throughout the years just to accomplish centralized authentication? How many times have I deployed Kerberos and messed around with LDAP, Open LDAP, trying to get slapd and slurpd, which I think they're all integrated now. But back in the day, trying to get slapd, slurpd to replicate properly, get it to fail over properly. My free radius authentication mechanisms, getting that linked in. Should I be using TACACS for the Cisco authentication, and then the migration from Telnet to SSH. And so throughout the years, it's not that I wasted a lot of time. It's I cried a little bit, but at the end of the day, it all came together. But it would always be a big project because there's a lot of thought that goes into this. If you have a database of all your usernames and passwords, and you have a radius server that needs to talk to that database, you really have to have a secure connection between those. That needs to be encrypted. That needs to be VLANed off. Nothing should be able to do an ARP injection to be able to get that data. You have to put a lot of thought into just that communication pattern. And on top of that, then we have to actually implement authentication. We have to make sure the instances are secure to the authentication provider. The same thing with SAML, IDPs, and SPs. And so there was just a lot of effort and a lot of resources put into such a foundational element of a deployment.
Yeah, totally agree. So moving into the AWS world, we're gonna spend our time. We're gonna start off with talking about identity and access management, how you're gonna control identity and access to your actual AWS account, which is almost like your new data center in the cloud. So I got a question for the audience, and please feel free to chime in on the chat. How many of you think that you actually have a good, solid identity strategy today for what you're doing on AWS? Throw your thoughts in there. If you think you've got something that's rock solid, we'd love to hear your thoughts. If you think it's suboptimal, maybe you've given some thoughts on where you think it's suboptimal and where you need to improve. We're going to take some time now and kind of start diving into IAM, though, and a few key things that really relate to security. And so Joe's got the IAM dashboard up on his laptop here. And the first thing we really want to kind of talk about are the account settings. So on the navigation pane on the left, identity and access management is a global service, so you're controlling access to your entire AWS account here, but there's a few key things that you can control here around like password policies and the length and the types of password policies you can enforce. So different things like PCI, for example, have requirements on how the password needs to be constructed and the things you need to be requiring from your users. So you get a lot of flexibility here in how you set your passwords and what you can make your users conform to if you're choosing to define users in the account.
And there's been a lot of discussion as to what is the best methodology in order to create a secure password. Sometimes the requirement is you must have uppercase, lowercase numbers plus special characters, minimum of 2 special characters. There's all types of ideas around this. Others say just have a sentence where maybe you misspell a couple of words or make all the words unrelated. And so that's what I kind of like about this interface is you choose your best path forward for your organization. Whatever you find in the policies and procedures, you can implement that with your AWS account.
Cool. I'm going to reiterate my question to the audience. I think we had a little bit of audio cut out there, but I was just kind of curious from people watching on the show, how many of you think you have a really solid identity strategy today for what you're doing on AWS, and what is your strategy that you might be willing to share, or where do you think you have gaps, and what are the things that you want to accomplish there? So the next thing that we've got in the dashboards that we're going to talk about are users. So these are people that you're actually granting access to be able to log in and access your AWS account. And so we've gone here and we've actually staged a few users in here. You may notice a theme for some of these users if you've watched any 70s or 80s TV. Oh, I have no idea how DMX got in there, but he seems to show up everywhere. So when you're looking at security for your account, the first question you should really ask you is who needs access to my account? And the people that do have access to their account, do they actually still work at the company? And do they actually need the permissions that they have? So we can actually dive into these users, for example. So let's take George, for example. Let's dive into George. So just by clicking on George.
Sorry, I had the Jetsons theme song in my head just now.
Good. It'll live with you forever now.
Yes, it will.
So right off the bat, with IAM, we get the ability to kind of take a look at what permissions somebody has, right? So right here, George has full administrator access to be able to do everything. And this tells you basically, IAM team has done an awesome job, by the way, of extending this console. It actually tells you which services are embedded in the policy that they have and the things that they can actually do within that service. So they've given a tremendous amount of information for you to dissect and know what somebody's doing. But you should be asking yourself who has access and what access do they actually have. And on top of that, you're going to actually know, well, how often do they use that access? And another cool thing that's come out in IAM recently is this Access Advisor, which is actually going to tell you, what service have they used, where policy is giving it to them, and when was the last time they actually accessed that particular service and those particular APIs. So we can see here for George, George hasn't actually done anything, and this data is actually within the last 4 hours. But if we go back to our users, let's pick somebody like Judy and take a look at her from the Access Advisor. We can actually see, Judy has some permissions, and we can actually see that she's actually been interacting with some of these APIs today and which services she's been interacting with. So it gives you the ability to kind of know what do these people actually have and how often are they actually interacting with it. And it'll allow you to kind of go about and maybe practice that policy of least access and maybe on an occasionally basis seeing, gosh, this person hasn't accessed this service in the last 180 days. Maybe we just need to remove it from them and just kind of more tightly lock down the system. Another thing that you'll see in this tab are the security credentials. If we go to the security credentials tab, is you can actually take a look. Hey, this person actually has, not only do they have an access key, it's actually an active access key. And once again, be asking yourself the question, do these people need programmatic access to the account outside of the management console? And how long have they had their access keys? This one was created maybe last night by somebody working on this. But how old is that access key? Does it need to be rotated? Those types of things. So IAM gives you a tremendous amount of ability to define your users and what those users can do and be able to actually audit those users as far as their permissions and be able to even control them at times. Joe, anything you'd add around what we've kind of been looking at for users right now?
Yeah, sure. So these are users that we're looking at as built into IAM. So these users were created in IAM. They're associated, possibly associated with groups, and we've seen all the permissions that we have. Whenever I look at a user, my first question is, what type of user is it? As you mentioned, if they have access keys and secret keys, if they have an access key associated with them, then it's probably a user that has programmatic access, right? If they don't have an access key associated with them, so we'll take a look at, oh man, DMX, how do you get in the system, right? We're going to notice that he doesn't have an access key, so DMX is probably just accessing the console.
Right. Yeah, because there's nothing that's going to allow him to be able to do something from a command line because he doesn't have the keys.
And then, from organizational perspective, do you want to mix and match? Because sometimes, me, Joe, let's say I have a user in the system. Do I want to say that my user should have console access plus an access key or multiple access keys associated with me, or should I have Joe API, which would be the user that has access keys associated? So that's an organizational question, but it kind of goes into what's your authentication model.
Right. Okay, cool. We've actually got an audience member, David McMo, 65. Sorry if I said that wrong, but he actually feels that their identity strategy is pretty strong. They're using Cognito user pools for their end users.
Hey.
And then for their employees, they're using IAM with MFA and strong passwords. So that's pretty cool. They feel they probably could be rotating their keys maybe a little bit more often than they are now. And we'll talk about in just a little bit some ways that maybe you could eliminate those keys entirely, but still be able to have the right level of access and those strong permissions. It's something that starts with an F. So that's awesome to hear that you guys are using Cognito user pools. We're not going to spend really much time on that today unless we wrap up early, but that's a great option for being able to allow people into your AWS resources and validate them. Another thing I wanted to just briefly touch base on, Joe, was roles. And roles are something that give people the ability to, maybe we go to that Twitch role there, and these are roles that give you, like somebody who's not a named user, the ability to access your AWS account. And so whether it be a human who's not a named user, or a thing or an application that still needs to access your account and they need to temporarily get into the account, they can assume a role and access those permissions. So here it looks very much like an end user. They have permissions. You can use Access Advisor in the same way and go and see what that role has done. But one of the really cool things that's come up here is the revoke sessions option. So roles can actually be fairly long-lived if you want them to be. And if you're auditing things and you see that a particular role is maybe doing something you don't want it to be doing, or you're finding suspicious activity, you can actually revoke these active sessions right here through the console, which I think is kind of a cool thing to be able to do, to actually be able to create a policy that will start blocking that particular role from doing anything further in your AWS account. It gives you the ability to kind of take action against that. And certainly you could take this same approach and apply it to an individual user if you wanted to apply a deny all to that particular user if they might be in the account and you want to stop them without having to go find that user and make them log out. But here with roles, we could do it for you automatically, but you could certainly apply this to your end users as well.
Yeah, and something to highlight too, an item that is sometimes forgotten is when you set up the trust relationship with a role, to enter a value for external ID. So we have a lot of examples when you're using a role programmatically with the API, with the SDKs, how to utilize an external ID, and it kind of gets you away from making mistakes that maybe you wouldn't identify before, just setting that string in there.
Yep. Got a quick follow-up question around the Access Advisor. So Access Advisor is basically telling you which AWS services within a particular policy a user has access to over a period of time. It doesn't give you the details on all the things they may have done within that service. We're actually going to talk about some strategies around that in a minute, but it gives you a quick idea of what of the policy that you've given a user to be able to do permissions in AWS, what are they actually doing within that policy as far as the services that are in that policy, and it allows you to figure out if they really need those access or permissions or not, or go back and audit and figure out if you need to maybe scope things down a little bit for that. So that's what Access Advisor is providing to you. Now, another cool thing is if you're auditing your AWS account, as we're kind of doing, and trying to figure out your security strategy, is the credential report. And this is a super quick way to just go download a list of users and what their credentials look like. So maybe you have a long list of users, and looking into the console doesn't really make sense, and you want to see something maybe more of a, if you like spreadsheets, a CSV type format. So this will generate and download a super quick report that you can open up in Excel, and it'll just give you a list of users, if they have an access key, do they have a password, when did they last log in, and stuff like that. So it's just another way of kind of doing a quick audit on what's going on in your report.
And then script it out.
Yeah. So we can actually, everything we've done up to this point, you can actually write scripts. So if you remember way back to episode 1, we talked about kind of recon and figuring out what's in your report. You can actually write scripts that will go in and tell you what's going on in your AWS account. You can see here, I've written this script to kind of give a quick count of the number of users. I've written it to give a full list of the user setups. This is actually very similar to what happens in the credentials report. And then give you a list of users and the actual policies that those users have. And so the cool thing here is, I wrote this in Bash using the CLI. This is something you can put in your pocket and take with you anytime. Take it to other accounts or rerun it on the same account. So it's a really great way to kind of do this at scale, or produce things in the way that you want to see them, or embed them into a larger workflow. So you certainly don't have to be in the console to be doing these things, either to find out what's there or even to make changes. You can use the APIs to make the necessary changes that you want to do as well.
And so anticipating the next question, whenever we do something programmatically, we do some type of automation, the question we always get is, how do we do that in PHP, right? And really? So we've also kind of duplicated that activity using PHP as well, and I can make that available to everybody that's requesting it, since we get that as a pretty significantly requested feature.
Yeah. Another clarification on the credentials report. So you get access to the credentials, but you don't get access to both sides of the access keys, for example. We still don't give you the second half of the access keys or what the actual password is. We just kind of give you the details on who has credentials and what's their status and how they're being used, but you still don't have the ability to actually go and get somebody else's credentials through that report, but it gives you that level of visibility.
Oh, and so for those that may not be overly familiar, when you create credentials for a user, you say, I need to create a new access key associated with this user, whatever it is. You only get that password, that secret key once.
Yes.
If you don't copy it, if you don't save it, those credentials are gone. If you've loaded this into an application, those credentials, and let's say it stores it in a binary format, and you don't have a way to export that or get to the raw data, those credentials are unusable. We can't reverse that hash. We can't get those ourselves.
Yep. Good point. So last thing I want to touch base with on IAM is, we've been talking about users and kind of what users do. An actual really good best practice is actually to find a way that you can just get rid of users as far as, it'd be great. Our jobs would be easy if there were no users, but get rid of users in your AWS account themselves, but still allow people into your account. And that's really that thing I talked about earlier about federation. So being able to allow users to log in your AWS account, but leverage your existing corporate identity store, whether it be Active Directory or some other LDAP, being able to allow them to basically assume a role, like we talked about earlier, that will still give them the right permissions into the account, but they won't actually be a named user. So it allows you to enforce that everybody's still using your corporate directory and the right permissions, and that you can lock somebody out of the account just through your simple corporate directory. So Joe's actually done a blog
it wouldn't
with
be
one of our partners as well.
It wouldn't be an episode if I didn't do a personal plug to try to drive some readership to a blog post. So here we have this blog was with a partner called Bidium. We have a ton of regular documentation that showcase how to use federated identities. This one gives you kind of like a follow the bouncing ball approach. There's a free account available on Bidium, and we like to highlight partner solutions. But this showcases, if you have Active Directory, how to use a solution to bring those users and that federation, that authentication to your AWS resources.
Yep. And so, if you guys have a chance, or if you're ready to go to that next level, I'd certainly encourage anybody who's maybe got named IAM users today, look at some of the identity providers, Bidium, Ping, Okta, OneLogin, all these companies have some sort of a solution, and they actually even take it a step further and often give you the ability to use their solution for command line access too. So if you think that you still need to create users and have access keys, these identity providers will actually allow you to integrate programmatically to get those same temporary credentials and still be able to do stuff at the command line without having to have named users and still be able to authenticate against your directory store. So it's an awesome way to kind of tighten your security and go to the next level when it comes to the users that are able to interact with your AWS account. So a quick station break here. You are, if you're new, you just signed in, we are doing GameDay Essentials. This is where we talk to you through what GameDay is and some of the key concepts you might want to know in order to really be successful at GameDay and as well as in your normal jobs. So I have another audience question. how many of you would like some sort of a starting point where you actually are able to look and identify security issues in AWS? Do you feel like I'd love somebody to be able to tell me or know where I might want to start when it comes to security on AWS? I would say my answer would be yes. There actually is a great starting point in AWS, and we actually, if we go back into the AWS console, there's a service that came out a few years ago called Trusted Advisor that actually will give you some security. It gives you lots of other things around cost and scalability, but we're going to focus on the security section here, where if we click on security, Trusted Advisor will actually start giving you some ideas and recommendations around what's going on in your account as it relates to security, whether it's good, bad, or maybe questionable. And you can even expand some of these items out to get more detail around what do they mean by that check? What's some of the criteria that's generating the alert? Even point you at some additional resources, like, for example, the MFA on the root account will actually point you at, hey, here's a link on how you actually can enable an MFA device on your root account. So Trusted Advisors are a really awesome tool to just, not just the first time you're in your AWS account, but periodically to be able to keep checking in and reviewing. We continue to add more stuff to this service over time. And you can also, if you're using business level support or higher, actually interact with Trusted Advisor through the APIs. So if you want to actually run the checks or see what Trusted Advisor is telling you without having to go into the console, you can actually script against it as well. So there's another awesome way to kind of be able to automate but still maintain the right level of security in your account.
Yeah, and it's kind of nice because, even prior to AWS, we got questions very similar to this, which is maybe I'm deploying a new web server, I'm deploying a Linux server, Windows, whatever it is. What are some of the basic checks that you kind of go through before you do a production deployment? What are the services that you're turning off? How are you shoring up like IP tables or the firewall in front of IIS? What does that look like? And so this kind of gives you that prescriptive guidance of saying, you really should have MFA en route. Maybe it's something that you forgot, or I don't use the root account, so I don't need to do something like that. So it kind of highlights all those settings. If you're deploying a Linux server, you're probably disabling like root SSH access. But where's that list of things to do? And it's kind of like giving you that really cool prescriptive guidance rather than having a checklist of these are the things that I need to do. What if I forgot an item?
Yep. And this is right in your AWS account. So if an admin leaves, the next admin comes in, all the information they need about your account's right there. So it's very portable within your organization. So I have another question for the audience, which this will be an interesting one. Have you ever done something in your AWS environment where you just all of a sudden say, oh, what did I just do? Or you see a change in your AWS environment and you're like, what just happened and who did that? It's quite an interesting, it always comes up when you least expect it, and it always happens at a moment's notice. So anybody ever have that happen to them before? I'm sure you have. It'd be interesting to know who's had that happen to them. In general, kind of tracking what's happening in the cloud is very different than maybe you might have found in a normal application or a normal data center. Like before with a cloud happened, Joe, like what are some of the things you would do or you saw to keep track of what's actually happening in an application or in a data center? I'm sure it was super challenging and super not easy.
Well, it probably looked different at every organization I went to, what that solution looked like. So the overall architecture would be the same. It would be, we'd have, our test, dev, staging, production environments, and even, within production, we'd have multiple environments. The database servers with critical information would be off in a corner, and then you'd have the main transactional databases and the analytics databases. But how, as an admin, not even as a programmer, but just as a systems admin, how do you get from my desk to I need to get console access to something like where we're storing credit cards in a database? First of all, how do I get there? And second, how do I keep track of what's actually being done there? And so there was a lot of things like redirecting the bash output to a text file, doing anomaly detection there, looking at who's able to get into this bastion host, ensuring that there's no other way to get to these environments other than going through the bastion host or jump box or whatever it is that you want to call it. Setting up syslogging on that bastion host, making sure that the file system was read-only except for syslog that would either be local or remote. And so there was a lot of really custom stuff that we would do, just to ensure that every action taken on that Bastion host would be recorded. Every API action, like let's say for instance, I had a bunch of hypervisors up and I wanted to reboot one of the VMs on there, prior to AWS. That API call would have to be recorded, which would be in a separate format than all these bash logs, which would be in a separate format from what's actually going on in the application. And so, kind of getting all of this information together and then building that anomaly detection so we could actually correlate, which of these items are actually related to one another. It was a process in reinventing the wheel kind of every time, and it was always a major undertaking. Yeah.
I mean, working in the database world for years, I can definitely remember going through audit logs or trying to figure out who the heck made this change to this table, or why did this particular thing crash, and having some level of success, but never being completely successful. So, certainly for applications running on AWS or you're running your database, there's still going to be a certain level of needing to leverage what's the best approach to audit those particular workloads. But when it comes to your AWS account itself, there's a super awesome service, which I'm sure most of you have probably heard about, and you can probably tell that we're moving into, but it's called CloudTrail. And CloudTrail gives you the ability to audit every API call that is going on in your AWS account. And when it comes to security, it's super awesome because you're able to get a level of validation that things are or not happening against particular services. It also gives you some operational visibility into going in and backtracking what's going on in that AWS account. And I'm sure a few of us have been in a situation where we've fired up a brand new AWS account, and then something happens, and we were like, oh, let's go back and look at CloudTrail. Like, oh, we haven't turned on CloudTrail for that account yet. Which normally should be a first thing you do with an AWS account, but it happens. And so we actually announced a new feature with CloudTrail last week where all accounts now have access to 7 days of CloudTrail history, either through the APIs or through the console. So if you have one of those moments where something's happened and you haven't turned on CloudTrail, if it's fairly recent, you actually still have a good chance of being able to find out what's going on, which is a very, very cool new feature, and props to the CloudTrail team for helping to overcome that particular issue.
So you don't have that like buyer's remorse. You can't say, "Oh, I didn't buy insurance in time."
Yeah.
So I've never done this. This isn't something that I've ever done. But let's say you're troubleshooting a problem, and you fix the problem, but you don't quite remember how exactly you went about fixing it. So, those that know me might say something different, but I'm going to say I've never done this. Scott, have you ever had an example of that?
Where I've actually gone through and troubleshot something and completely messed something up.
But then it works, so it's like I'm not going to do anything to break it, but maybe I don't remember every change that I've done.
Yes, definitely, and it's usually about 2 or 3 in the morning when the pager's just gone off. So yeah, I've had that happen before.
And then it's like, oh, you know what? I'll document this in the morning, and sometime around like 6, 7 a.m. you kind of blank out. What did I do the night before? Yeah. Well, nobody's yelling at me, so I feel good about it.
Yeah. So this is this is a way to kind of start unwinding and actually figuring out what was done, whether it be for good reasons or bad reasons. CloudTrail is your friend, and being able to get an overview of what's going on in an AWS account. So we're going to look at the CloudTrail console itself, and we're in the Oregon region, and we've got CloudTrail. And so a couple things I wanted to show you. So it's showing you the details about the events. Joe's just kind of doing a general scroll here, and it's to start off with, it's just giving us information about every event that is recorded that we can see. But one of the really cool things is that in the filter section, we can actually go in and change that attribute to be a particular user.
Is it resource? Username. Yeah.
Yep, username. And so we put like Judy in there, for example, who I know has been doing some work in the account. We can zero in on, maybe not Judy. How about Rose? Oh, it's a capital J, sorry. With a capital J. Judy. And we can zero in and actually see what Judy's been up to in the AWS account. And so we can see, for example, she's been creating keys. She's been running instances. She's actually created a database instance. She created another user and created an access key for that user and ran some more instances. So this is something that maybe sounds a little bit odd to us. She's creating instances. She's creating new users. She's creating development users, giving them access keys. These are things that might be events that are important to us that might say, we want to dig a little bit deeper and actually know what Judy's is up to and why she's doing these things. It's another way of auditing. Do they maybe have too many permissions? The fact that Judy can go out there and just freely create an IAM user and create a key, something you might care about, might want to know about, might want to lock down. If we go to Rosie with a capital R, we can also see Rosie's been up to a few things. Rosie's created some instances. Rosie's created a bucket called data extraction bucket, which is an interesting. First of all, that bucket name exists, and we were able to take it. But that's an interesting bucket name, and Rosie's been running some instances. So once again, maybe events that on their own don't mean something, but the fact she's created instances and she's created these buckets, maybe combined, are things that we might want to take care of and pay attention to. So,
yeah, I mean, I wonder who is Rosie? If this is a large organization, is this a data extraction bucket, or are we looking at an actual data exfiltration bucket?
Right.
So, I mean, is Rosie somebody who's like an executive assistant, should have no capability to create an S3 bucket, or is Rosie a mastermind?
Yeah. So CloudTrail is giving you that first level of visibility into what's going on in your account. What we're showing you here is in the console. We have APIs for accessing CloudTrail, and you can also, if you go to the trails, you can actually configure CloudTrail to go to a particular S3 bucket where we dump a bunch of JSON data on a regular basis, and you can consume that data from an S3 bucket, or you can actually stream that data to CloudWatch logs as well. And one of the cool things is that at scale, one of the interesting things is at scale, CloudTrail can be a little bit of a challenge to be able to dissect and chew through and figure out all the information that's there. So working in the console or even in the APIs may not be the best approach. There are some things you can do at scale, though, and one of the things we've done is we published a white paper that talks about some different approaches you can take with logging. And one of the things you could actually do is stream your CloudTrail information into Elasticsearch and have a Kibana dashboard on top of that. And Joe's got a quick example. You can see the name of the white paper here. Is around, we'll show you the name of the white paper at the beginning, but this particular diagram really talks through using CloudTrail, getting that into CloudWatch logs, using Lambda to consume those events, and then pumping it into the Elasticsearch service so that you have the ability to actually maybe search for key information or be able to analyze it and get at that information very quickly. And it's really helpful when you're talking about CloudTrail activity at scale. Joe, can we go to the front and just bring up the name of that white paper real quick? Using Elasticsearch service to log and monitor almost everything. So there's other things you can do in here, but this particular one was focused on CloudTrail. So certainly a do-it-yourself approach for CloudTrail, but we also have, I work with security partners a lot. There's tons of partners who specialize in this and being able to get this CloudTrail data and make sense of it very quickly. If you just go to the CloudTrail homepage, there's a partner section off of that. So if it's not kind of in your core competency, you definitely have a lot of options to be able to ensure that you can look at your CloudTrail data and make sense of it. It's a core thing. You should really pay attention to it and take advantage of it. Make sure you have the right level of visibility into what's going on in your account.
So the first mystery of the day that we started off with is, how did DMX get into our AWS console?
Right.
Obviously somebody met him at a party last night, and the first thing he said was, man, I really want to get into your AWS account. And I don't know, DMX must be like really into AWS. So kind of looking back at the history, we see, oh man, look at that. Like there was an account created for DMX. It looks like I blacked out and I created the account for him last night after a bender. So, all right, this is my fault. I created the account for DMX. What if, we wanted to pursue another way to find that information? Here we have a solution that uses Kibana. We could have created something in CloudWatch logs with the JSON filter within CloudWatch logs that said, every time there's a add user, create user, update password, any type of those things, we can set off an alert. We could do SNS, SES to send an email, send a text message notification. Only if certain users create it, something like that. And then kind of correlating back to the whole federation with like local databases of users. Let's say you're an organization that uses Active Directory or any LDAP database, for instance. We'll just say Active Directory. If you have groups assigned to these users, so Rosie from our example, let's say Rosie started in the organization. Rosie's in the marketing department, and so we've said that marketing should have public assets. So therefore, we're going to give Rosie the ability to create S3 buckets. So we assigned a role to her that allows her to create S3 buckets. But Rosie should never be able to start and stop instances, interact with RDS, anything like that. She's purely a marketing individual. And so the role that Rosie would have is only allow the S3 activities and disable permissions for any other activity. And then further, we can use something like AWS config to do a rule that says if anybody in this role were ever to do anything with an instance or another service, set off an alert. So this is another time when it comes to a little bit of personal preference. How is it that you want to handle it? And is there a partner solution that you want to use? Because as Scott said, there's a ton of great examples.
Yep, that's great. Thank you, Joe. There's a clarification question coming on from the chat that I'm just going to focus on as far as the data retention as it comes to CloudTrail. So CloudTrail, you can dump the data into an S3 bucket or into CloudWatch logs. And in both cases, you can retain the data as long as you want. You pay for the storage of the data in S3 or in CloudWatch logs. It's really up to you how long you want to keep it around. So you can keep it in S3 forever. You could keep it in S3 for a very short period of time till it's consumed into your actual solution where you're actually able to analyze it and look at the CloudTrail files.
You move it to Glacier.
You can move it to Glacier. You could have some sort of a lifecycle policy that will delete the data after 30 days. It's really up to you. You're fully in control of your data. We'll take it and we'll put it in a spot that's most convenient to you, and then you can figure out how long you actually want to keep the data around.
And then, what if you've got just a ton of data in S3 and you want to analyze it? AWS EMR.
Yes.
I always love those examples.
Yes, EMR can chew through that data very quickly and get you caught up to speed on things that are going on in your log files. So
you ever just wake up in the morning and think, I want to work with MapReduce? Well, I mean, it happens. It happens, every third Wednesday.
Good. So I want to move on to something else that's it's a little bit outside of GameDay, but I think it's kind of an important thing that we want to touch base on as well is encryption when it comes to security. So first question for the audience is really, just like we talked about with identity, do you think you have a good encryption strategy in place, and what is it? As far as much as you're willing to share, we aren't asking for company secrets or anything like that.
I always think of great questions after the fact. We should have been like, what's your favorite trapdoor function, or your favorite cipher suite, or your preferred, hash, password storage methodology.
Yeah, this is a little bit more general.
Okay.
If you guys have any of those responses to those questions, though, you're welcome to share them with us.
I just want to see if anybody else uses my solution.
So when we talk about encryption as it relates to AWS, we're talking about two things. One is encryption of data, whether it be at rest or client-side encryption, or even encryption of the data on the wire, so host to host or thing to thing. And one of the cool things with AWS when it comes to encryption is that because of the shared responsibility model, you as a customer have a lot of flexibility in how you do encryption. So you can implement your own encryption if you've got some amazing backroom, windowless office full of encryption geeks that just write this stuff from scratch. You can build your own stuff and run it on top of AWS. You can pick a lot of different third-party solutions, AWS partners that provide you encryption solutions, or there's several solutions that AWS offers as well to help you along with that encryption strategy. The important part is that you have the flexibility to implement what you want to maintain your security profile or meet the level of compliance you want when it comes to encryption. So one of the things I wanted to just focus on, and if we can get back into the console, is one of the services that AWS has around that's really important when it comes to maybe implementing an encryption strategy is the key management service. So if we go, key management service is actually part of identity and access management. Oh. And when you go into there, you'll see at the bottom there's actually the encryption keys. And so this service allows you to create your own customer master keys or use keys that are provided by the services. And one of the cool things that I wanted to really highlight here is that key management services is embedded into a lot of the AWS services so that you can start to manage your encryption of your data at rest, which is a common thing we see across a lot of different compliance requirements. And we thought we'd just show you a couple of examples of using that if we could. So if we went into EC2 and went to create a new EBS volume, for example, and wanting to have that data encrypted at rest, which helps to ensure that data is protected if the actual data that the storage device was compromised. One click of a button, we create a snapshot, and we either use that master key, so there's a default EBS master key which is tied to your account, or we can use the maybe a little bit more questionable, the Rosie encryptor key, which Rosie also created along with her EC2 instance and her bucket.
So the marketing lady created the encryption key.
Exactly.
Seems
yeah,
legit.
So seems legitimate to me. But the point is that you have the ability to use keys that are tied to the specific service but are still tied to your account, or keys that you've created yourself, or keys that you've uploaded. But with the check of a button and choosing from one drop-down, you are able to create an EBS volume that is now encrypted at rest. You can also do this through the APIs with one API line to do the same thing. So it's super easy and super integrated with your services and gives you no noticeable degradation in performance. If we were to look at another example, if we were to go to S3 and go and create a bucket, we actually have a bucket that's, if you go to that monkey in a bucket, sorry, Joe, I didn't tell you about this one. Monkey in a bucket, and there's actually should be some objects potentially in that bucket already. Maybe not. But what we can do is the point is that with S3, you can enable encryption, server-side encryption, which will encrypt the data at rest. When you upload an object, you can provide an encryption key as you're uploading it if you want to do it programmatically. Or you can go into the console and actually choose a particular object and enable what kind of encryption you want on that object. So it's really cool there. And the other cool thing is that you can actually implement a policy on your bucket that requires that everything that's in that bucket be encrypted with server-side encryption. If we go to that other link I sent you, Joe, yeah, right there. This is an example of a policy that actually you can apply to your S3 bucket that says, look, everything in this bucket needs to be encrypted. It needs to have a condition that it's actually being server-side encrypted. And you can even take that further. You can even say which key you want that data to be encrypted with. So it's super flexible and super powerful to enforce kind of your encryption policies when it comes to AWS and the things you're storing on AWS.
And this is a really powerful feature. When we think about how it is that we're encrypting our data at rest, we're relying on the instance or the virtual machine or the hardware box. We're relying on the encryption on that hard drive, on that file system, whether it's a root file system or a separate volume, and then on top of that, we're hoping that we're building the application to encrypt this data as it's in transit, and however it is that we're storing these files and this information, we're requiring that encryption as well. And so this kind of takes out a little bit of the requirement to ensure that this is encrypted via the application once you're placing the file within your storage mechanism. And that's a really powerful feature. Instead of having to worry about random places that you're storing your keys, or what application has separate keys from maybe your centralized certificate authority, being able to hand off some of this management allows you to really focus on implementing best practices rather than designing best practices.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense. We have feedback from the audience. We asked about encryption strategies that they're using. One person has an awesome encryption strategy. They keep everything under their mattress, which I'd be curious on how that works at scale.
But if your mattress is in a bunker and you live at the bottom of the bunker, yes. I might feel good about this.
Yes. We have another.
It's all written down.
Yes.
And remember the old Roman cipher suites? Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you did that, I might be able to get on board with that.
Okay. And then we have another user who is using KMS. They encrypt any and all the data at rest. So the fact that it's just a click of a button, you can turn these things on. It's super easy to use. They also encrypt all the communication between the nodes and their services. And they're using things like Amazon Certificate Manager and the key management service, and really let those services do the heavy lifting. Let them focus on how to scale, how to maintain the availability, and let you as an end user really just focus on using them as a service. So,
I love the RDS example too, mm-hmm. because your database servers, they should be encrypted. Mm-hmm. There's different ways to approach that encryption. Mm-hmm. Are we doing row level, column level? Are we doing an entire system as an encrypted entity? Mm-hmm. The fact that with RDS you could just click a checkbox and that's taken care of for you. That's a really great feature.
Yeah, it's a great way to get started once again to encrypt your data, and you'll find that over time, this continues to roll out into more AWS storage services. I know EFS just got integration with KMS last week, so that's another storage solution where you can now have your data encrypted at rest very easily. One of the other things that
and also just to remind everybody, these aren't the solutions that you have to use.
Right.
These are all optional solutions. So if you want to utilize your own encryption schema, you're free to do so. For instance, I'm running Lux on a couple of instances. We still have BitLocker on Microsoft. We still have custom encryption schemas. We have Cloud HSM as a hardware solution that's available. So we provide opportunities, we provide services and features where you can take advantage of AWS implemented cryptographic solutions, or you could definitely utilize whatever it is that you've been using historically, or implement whatever best practices you want. We have the partner network has different solutions. Check out the partner ecosystem. But this is, once again, just another option for you, and it comes down to a little bit of personal preference and how it is that you want to manage your deployment.
Yeah, those super, and it's, once again, it goes back to the shared responsibility model where you get a lot of control around that encryption for you. So that's an awesome point there. Joe mentioned the Cloud HSM. So if you have, you like having hardware that basically will wipe itself clean if you look at it the wrong way, Cloud HSM is there for you to implement a hardware security module, whether it be in the cloud as your standalone or as a backup solution for something you're running on the cloud or in your data center. And it's come up with a new kind of hourly pricing model for that solution as well that was announced last week at the New York Summit. So if you have even stricter requirements around how you're protecting your keys and protecting your data, there are some really cool solutions around HSMs on AWS as well. So those are the main things that we wanted to talk about when it comes to security this week. There's a ton more we could talk about for security on AWS.
We didn't even get into like port spans. We didn't get into the actual process of correlating events. I mean, that would probably be its own series.
Yeah. There's a lot more we could talk about when it comes to security. But I think we've given you kind of based on the comments I'm seeing, I think we've fulfilled a few knowledge gaps that might have existed before this. And so hopefully we've kind of given you more information to work with and positioned you about some things you might want to know about even when it comes to GameDay, as well as what you're doing in your real world jobs. So next week we got our next episode, which is going to be the conclusion of our first series around GameDay Essentials. And next week we're going to focus on cost optimization, which, Joe, I know you and I have both spent some time on in working with our partners, but also just in general, how we can come up with smart architecture decisions with cost in mind while still maintaining the right level of availability and scale around our solutions on AWS. And as you'll learn, we generally factor some sort of cost into GameDay as far as the infrastructure and how you're using things. So this will be very relevant to GameDay and some of the scoring that we do, as how you might architect solutions with that kind of cost in mind. So join us next week. It should be Joe and I and potentially one other guest joining us to
special
talk
guest
about
star.
this. Yes. So we really appreciate you guys sticking around today. It's been great to see the chat and some of the feedback that we've had today. So we hope to see you guys back next week.
Yes. So we still have some of the GameDay bracelets. So if you run into either Scott or I, maybe on the street or in a different city, just bring up the Twitch show, and we've got great GameDay bracelets. I think I've got like 20 of them left.
My dog ate mine. Seriously. So I made a new one. But it's been great to have you around, guys, today. And thanks for taking the time out of your day. And we'll see you guys next week. Thanks a lot.